Hello and welcome to our next Surviving Work conversation, and today we're going to be thinking about health and social care as a structure, and we're going to be looking at some of the systemic reasons why working in health and social care has become so difficult for many of us. And to help us think about it, we've got Marianna Fotaki, who is a professor at Warwick University, and we've got Julian Lousada, who is a psychoanalyst. My first question to you is just to tell us a bit about your experience of working life and what brought you into your field.
It's a long trajectory and I'll make it very short. So I'm a qualified medic, but I was always interested in understanding what makes people becoming ill and how can they be healed. And that is increasingly understood the causes were social rather than medical, or in medicine we tend to underplay the social causes. So then I needed to understand more about public health, but guess what? Everything in public health was about the money. So I said I go to London School of Economics and study economics. And I like studying, and I did a PhD. And after doing other things like consulting to organizations, I decided to become a full-time academic. So a long answer to a simple question.
And you now work in a business school.
And now I work in a business school, which has proven to be a blessing in disguise, paradoxically. Why? Because it allows me, for example, to use psychoanalysis. So business schools are eclectic places. We have very applied issues, and we are allowed, and more than that, we are encouraged to draw on a variety of disciplines and practices as well. So in that sense, I feel quite free. And, I work with organizations, I work with the students. Students flock to the business schools because they want to be employed, to have this management or the title. So it's a golden opportunity, blessing in disguise, as I say.
Amen. I agree.
My background is that I did social administration and social policy at LSE, having worked in the States for quite a long time, and eventually trained as a social worker and at Sussex University. And then after a period of being a practitioner and a senior practitioner, I began to teach social work. And that was really the sort of period of time that I moved towards psychoanalysis. I did my first training, and on completion of that, I came here to the Tavistock many years ago, and I became the clinical director of the adult department. Throughout all of that, I've been very interested in organizational life and the relationship between psychoanalytic thinking and organizational life. And I've now left here, and I'm in private practice, both organizationally and clinically.
And what brought you into this field?
Well, politics originally. When I was working in the States, I became very involved in the civil rights movement, on the one hand. And on the other hand, I worked with street gangs, and my supervisor happened to have been trained here. And she was a formidable woman. And so I both became politically active there, and my first introduction to psychoanalysis or psychoanalytic thinking was through her. So that was the beginning, if you like. My whole journey has been a combination of politics and psychoanalysis. It's been my sort of trajectory. And obviously, I've been the chair of the British Psychoanalytic Council for 8 years. And so that's trying to think about psychoanalytic enterprise in the context of contemporary preoccupations.
Wow. Yeah, amongst friends. So both of you write, of course, about some of the systemic factors that influence health and social care, states of mind, and also working lives. So I want us to have a discussion about what are the key systemic factors that are influencing working life in health and social care at the moment.
Well, if I can say from where I sit, and indeed, Julian, I've also actually did my MSc in Social Policy and Administration, as it was called these days. That's at right. The LSE, with Julian Legrand, actually.
Yeah.
So really,
So we're brother and sister, really.
brothers and sisters. So indeed, actually, and that was in the early 90s. I'm already kind of saying when that happened. And already in those times, things started really to change systemically. But by systemic changes, what I mean is just the discourses have changed, the meanings that were associated with health and care have changed, and also the financing arrangements have changed. And I think so very concrete arrangements have changed, but that was underpinned by political ideas, by values, and by meanings, I'd say. So I think these are very, very important factors that influence systemic change. They are concretized as financial arrangements, but actually they're driven by ideologies and values, less tangible things in my view.
Yeah, I think I take it up from that ideological point of view to start with, because it seems to me that the financial structure that we're now sort of struggling with could never have taken place if, the idea of the welfare settlement hadn't been so seriously challenged in the end, well, initially by Thatcher, but, and she did it in such a sort of brutal manner. I mean, the welfare state became renamed the nanny. And, if you think about the consequence that the maternal function, however problematic the mother state was, and clearly there were lots of things that mother didn't do very well, but to turn it into a nanny, without asking where the mother's gone and why, and what she might have had to take with her. So that's the kind of atmosphere. And the other thing that, began in 79 or whenever it was the relentless denigration of the professional class, the chattering class. So you had a sort of an attack on the instrument of welfare, undermining its value as a social function, humane social function. It becomes, there's endless debate about the destructiveness of dependency. I mean, it is an appalling idea. Then you attack the workers. You call them, they're charlatans. And of course, there are all sorts of mistakes. And there are the occasional people who are not very good at their job. But, to attack them so comprehensively, whether they be teachers or social workers, care workers, doctors. I mean, currently the new doctor's contract is an absolute disgrace, junior doctors. I speak with some feeling about it because my daughter is one. But, it's the relentless substitution of the professional class by a consuming class. And that's, links, I think, with what you're saying about.
Yes.
So the ideological atmosphere is just as important, just picking up on your use of the word, as the financial constructs and policies that we're having to grab, the privatization that we're going to talk about in a while.
I just would like to add to what you've said two very important things, picking up on consumerism. So not only vulnerability has been associated with failure. So, for example, if you are sacked from your job, you must be doing something wrong. If you are ill, it is your personal failure. So that is underpinned by attacking anything to do with collective values, collective action, and just relationality, speaking up in psychoanalytical terms. So collectivities, communities, even family unit, as you say, has been, it's wonderful, your metaphor between mother and actually nanny. Nanny is a person we pay normally, right?
Yeah.
A person we contract out to provide care. And that shift is so fundamental and has such deeper meaning and rippling consequences throughout, I'd say. So on the one hand, vulnerability is just exiled. It's a personal failure, personal keyword. And on the other hand, actually, those people who are the individuals are also consumers. So these are no citizens, no people who are in need. And we are in different points of our lives. We become different people. I mean, we are all in need of care. Even being pregnant, you are not ill, but you're actually in some need of care. Never mind when we are young or when in sort of other moments in our lives. And all these important moments, what makes us human, is just absolutely collapsed under, an all-inclusive concept of a consumer who actually does what? Well, buys things. Hence nanny, of course. No giving, but just actually doing job that is being contracted out. Job of care is being contracted out.
And of course it's penetrated so much of the trainings. I mean, the training I had as a social worker, the psychosocial underpinning of it, moving more and more into a sort of instrumental competency-based training in which the relational, is, or has been, I mean, there's some sort of attempt to shift it these days, but taken a very poor second,
So I want to pick up on some of these themes, because I think the experience for a lot of people working in health and social care is the experience of total disorientation. Something concrete and real, like contracting out, is happening. And it leads to this sort of incredible sort of paralysis, because it's very difficult to understand what's going on. On one level, it's just a thing called contracting out. On another level, it represents a major threat to this thing called care. Now, we believe, I think, psychoanalytic ideas are very helpful in trying to understand the meaning of these changes. So you've written a book, very important book, a core book on this course called Borderline Welfare, and you write a lot about narcissism in the NHS. So I wonder if we can unpack some of these psychoanalytic ideas a little more.
I think, well, I'm a great believer of psychoanalysis. I'm completely biased, totally positively biased.
Friends.
Absolutely. But I have also seen that, not just, in terms of clinical practice. I've seen that, we have a wonderful and just venerable history of how helpful that has been, or in terms of actually organizational consulting from the 60s. But actually, even if you don't use the exact psychoanalytic terminology, or vocabulary, which can be sometimes persecutory for certain people. But if you just convey or use the concept, work from the premise of the concepts without necessarily getting into this arcane jargon, it is extremely helpful and empowering. And I've done that with my students, So psychoanalysis is very helpful, but just more specifically, if we were to use it analytically to unpack what happens in the public realm in the way that we've been talking, I think it's extremely useful to understand that, the ideology can only work if it's inscribed in subjects and collectivity psyche. And that has that emotional and emotional effect. It is effectively underpinned. That ideology, wouldn't have worked so successfully if it wasn't associated with positive things. So, for example, going back to that nanny, which that's really wonderful what you've said, but going back to that nanny, actually, well, in what position does that place the user? Infantilize. Only the grown-up can actually, be a proper citizen. And who is a grown-up? Well, a person who earns money and who can pay and so on and so forth. So the state is paying for the nanny, and the user is like that infantilized, not quite a grown-up person. All I'm trying to say, without actually giving all this positive, associating with positive affect, all those ideologies like choices. Who is against choice? Who can be? I've been writing on choice, it's my favorite topic. Who can be against choice? But actually, in reality, what it means, it means that users of care have very insignificant choices they can actually, kind of use, but they don't have choices over very important things. Like, for example, to see the same GP. Now we now have an umbrella care in my practice, right? Which means that each time I see whoever is available. But I can have a choice over what time, perhaps, I want to see whoever is available, right? So it's a paradox. So all I'm trying to say here, psychoanalysis can help us how actually we ourselves as individuals, often unreflectively support those ideologies because they're presented as shiny objects to us, and the illusion is being created that we can all be these super consumers, yeah, in that decreasing pool of work, of good work, right, with precarity and with contracts, indeed, as Julian mentioned, and we've discussed, Elizabeth. So the illusion is that we all will have endless money, and then therefore, through this endless money, we can just have this endless power on the marketplace. And that's something very aspirational and very good for all of us. So I think psychoanalysis helps us on individual level to understand how we ourselves support and what does it do for us, but also just to see how collectively we have kind of ascribed to that imaginary, which is absolutely fallacious and absolutely destructive, because if anything, we work longer, we have less money on the whole, right? Very, very few people are in that position of having that endless power that comes with endless money. So what I'm trying to say, we're destroying important things in the process whilst buying into that beautiful future that will never come. And this is an affective process, and psychoanalysis is uniquely qualified to actually help us underpin those aspects.
One has to explain why it is that this shift in ideology seemed to be attractive to people. It did get support. So what has happened, as it were, to the mind? It's, the social mind that says, no, we don't want mum, we want nanny. Or we don't want nanny, we want something that we create ourselves as consumers. And I think receiving help is very difficult. There's tremendous ambivalence about recognizing that we need help. And there's always and if you can attack the helper as a way of covering up one's shame for needing help. So I think one has to realize that the ideology, if you like, mobilizes a lot of sort of ambivalence in the social mind. Psychoanalysis has to help us understand that we're not just victims of a sort of Tory ideology only. We are, and it's crude and brutal, but also its capacity to be endorsed. The class tension had instruments, if you like, to dilute its pathology, called trade unions, called trades councils, called all sorts of instruments that actually existed to do two things. One is to try and promote the rights of the working class, and on the other, critically, and this was a concept designed by the trade union movement, the idea of solidarity. That is to say that we have differences, but we need to have something in common which allows us to manage our differences. Now, one of the things that has gone is the social instrument that brings people together, recognizes that they have collective needs, they suffer collectively. And in its place, we have an increasingly fragmented and individualized world, where there are no longer
That's it.
those sorts of instruments that bind us together. And why this is important is because precisely in the absence of something that's about solidarity, we have the tendency, the pull towards xenophobic and racist ideas, which is always not far away. What brings us together so that humanity, rather than individual anxiety and fear, is it's only the social that finds a container for individual anxiety.
Absolutely. And what I want to say on narcissism specifically, surely narcissism is part of our of who we are as humans. However, there are narcissistic tendencies that we all kind of have. But as Julian very correctly says, and I'm a great believer of that institutions represent a collective means of keeping at check the worst aspects of our human nature, for example. However, this neoliberal kind of governmentality, as I call it, meaning using the neoliberal discourse of individuals and eschewing and just disavowing anything that has to do with any collective action, any sort of collective action, or any sort of collective state of mind even, or identification that could be collective rather than having to do with individual identity, is actually, seen as a threat in the neoliberal kind of governmentality, but also going back to the narcissism. So I'd say that a narcissist, well, there are many definitions, but one key definition perhaps is that a narcissist is actually not looking at the consequences of his or her actions when these consequences don't concern himself or herself. And I think in that way, and that links very well to raising concerns. But in the NHS, it's quite interesting, because whenever people raised concerns, legitimate concerns, this has been used against them, indeed, to trash the professional class. And Julian, I wanted to make a link to what you've said. I think the working class has been under attack for the last 3 decades or so in this country. But actually now, in the last 10 perhaps years, and that becomes intensified, the professional middle class is being attacked, and that is reflected in the precarious, contracts, for example, because, they're too expensive, basically, one of the reasons. And so Elizabeth, because I work with these whistleblowers quite a lot, actually, in not just only in health, but in health as well. So the thing is that such a, case of failure is used politically against the whole sector. And people just have this, so one has to find a channel how to raise a concern that will not undermine the whole foundation of professional ethos on which the whole sector is standing, I'd say. But I think the fear is such a powerful tool of controlling people, and Julian was actually very well aptly referring to that. I mean, what worse can happen to any of us, middle class people, so to speak, than actually us losing our job? And we all live, at least maybe not in fear about our concrete jobs, although who knows. You asked before, how can we, bring about collective action? Well, on issues as well, rather than actually being part of a group and having to ascribe, to Marx, Lenin, or whatever. No, I'm not. I'm a great fan of Marx and not so much Lenin. But anyway, not so much Lenin. But all I'm trying to say, rather than actually trying to have a movement that everybody has to kind of live that movement ideology, there are issues that connect us. I think, which are quite important.
The move from the idealism that brings you into public service to the experience of that being crushed. Compromised is the second stage. That one's ideals are compromised by the lived experience of actually the contemporary moment. So that's a problem. I have ideals here. I have to compromise them to make sense of what's going on, the policies, targets, etc., etc. Moving to crushed idealism, where I become just industrialized, an instrument of not of idealism but of output, which of course social care is increasingly an industrialized activity, as is social work around safeguarding.
I think that's right. And social care is interesting because about 80% of people who work in social care are women, 45 years plus. They have the memory of public sector, they have a certain ethos, and they're failing to recruit younger people because that isn't kind of programmed into their approach to care, and it's a big problem.
One of the things that undermines the collective action of the junior doctors or the social care workers is how to encourage the consumer to complain. That if you break the solidarity between the provider and the receiver of care, then it's very hard to get a movement that actually tries to protect the care.
Absolutely,
because it's a splitting. This is another psychoanalytic.
100% splitting.
Splitting the consumer and the provider, pushing the patient's needs first. Of course, they need brilliant care, and of course, it needs to be compassionate. But you'll never get it unless you equally care for the staff. equally?
I think that's very interesting. We had an interesting debate on as part of this series on racism and also bullying. And we looked at this model of duty of care, who cares for who. And we collectively came up with a flower, very nice image, it's like a Venn diagram with 5 circles. And we overemphasised, or what we felt needed more emphasising, was firstly for health and social care workers, our duty of care to ourselves. So very much a first aid approach to our states of mind, how destructive this is. But also our duty of care to each other, as colleagues,
100%.
as comrades, as people who are involved in the employment relationship. Then we've got the additional NHS's responsibility to patients, etc. But the underemphasis is always the individual, my responsibility towards myself to remain intact in a very difficult system, and my responsibility to other colleagues. And this is what comes up a lot in the whistleblowing experiences and literature, is often it's not criticism of the individuals involved, but it's a huge difficulty in taking this as a joint failure, a joint responsibility. Same with racism, same with bullying. Exactly. We're all involved in it one way or the other, even if we're just a patient who doesn't want to lose their place in line by making a complaint about how staff are being treated. But actually it is all of our responsibility. I find psychoanalytic ideas really powerful in just stating the obvious that we don't want to see, which is we are actually already all involved in these issues.
And actually, patient doesn't know why his or her care is the last consideration of the whole system, because you have different people who actually design care, different people who report to financial targets, different people who are on the front line. Nurses versus doctors are endlessly pitted against, for good reasons, of course. There was a good reason, so to speak. Nurses have to have more power versus the doctors, but that actually turned out to be, as Julian said very correctly, not only the professional interests of both nurses and doctors are not protected through that pitting one against each other, but actually the patient's interests, who are supposed to be first, are actually, often going out of the window, so to speak. So that splitting is really by design, I think, introduced actually into the, to break down this collective logic that underpin the collective philosophy, the collective values that underpin the NHS and the universalistic values, I think. This is what's is still what's been attacked.
Yes, I agree. I think the other thing is, just thinking about how psychoanalysis can help, is that there is an assumption, or there is a wish to say, if only we got the managerial governance design right, everything would, we'd have compassion, we'd have happy patients, we'd have contented staff. Actually, it seems to me that one has to keep in mind that what people in the public realm, in social care, in medical care or education, they come across disturbing people, people, not very nice people,
of course,
people who are dying, people whose lives are terrible. Now, what do they do with these dynamics? What is the sense in which those can be processed so that they don't disturb the staff? We know it's true that, the projections from the patients, the clients, get into the staff, and the staff have to defend themselves against the feelings that they have, been pushed into them by their clients. What do they do with them? Now, if they can't process it, they try and pass it up to management. But of course, management is also projecting down, because the management's very anxious about meeting its targets and so on. And so unless we can build in an idea that organizations or teams sometimes work better and sometimes work less well. And if we could monitor that intelligently, and knowing that the only way that it can be kept an eye on is by talking. Whether it be Barlink groups or Schwartz rounds or something in which, it is all right to have feelings about the work you're doing, distressing feelings. Or sometimes it's all right to feel very angry with some of you. I mean, I imagine GPs when they, the sheer numbers of medically unexplained symptoms, which they know at some level are psychologically induced, and nobody quite knows how to provide for that. The amount of money it wastes the NHS is huge, enormous, millions, billions. People have heart operations. They convince the system they need a heart operation when there is no actual medical case for it, apparently. I mean, there's an enormous amount of study done on why do people want to feel that the only way they can express distress is physically. It says something about our society.
Absolutely.
That mental distress and disturbance is so much harder to feel it's all right to talk about.
I think that's right, and it's really moving how powerful psychoanalytic understandings can be, because when you're, in the thrust of it and at work and really struggling, the thought of trying to understand it seems like a total waste of time. It can be quite infuriating, and it is something that the patient rages against a lot, is trying to just understand it. You think, well, what difference is that going to make? One of the differences it makes is it allows you not to moralise or be righteous or take judgment about something that is just going to happen in health and social care. When you're dealing with people that are dying, when you're dealing with distress and pain, it's very distressing and painful, and that goes somewhere.
And it reminds one of one's one's mortality.
Exactly.
Or one's mum or dad.
Yes,
or
100%.
Your friends.
We feel stuff about this.
But you see, all the work that Isabel Menzies did, seminal work, but it's almost as if you have to redo it every generation for it to sort of be remembered. And of course, as it's remembered, it's changed inevitably. And I think there are a lot of sort of soft management instruments now that are meant to be about well-being. Now, if I've put in a well-being policy and you are still stressed, it must be because you have a psychopathology. Because I've got this well-being practice and policy. I'm a nice, good, intelligent, psychologically sound manager. So I put in well-being policies, whatever they may be. But when a member of staff suffers stress, in those circumstances, the tendency is for them to be sent home on gardening leave because the well-being policies are already in place.
Yeah.
So there's an immense pressure not to see the systemic issues that are at work.
Absolutely. And this sort of kicked off, didn't it, this summer with the proposal that 350 job centres were going to be serviced by CBT professionals or psychological wellbeing practitioners for the people that are unemployed. That did actually get psychotherapists on a picket line.
Yes.
Which I've never seen before.
Streatham,
because
indeed.
That just went too far. That was really, you have to be kidding.
But when you get, CBT therapists in a row, with headphones on, talking to people.
Yeah.
I mean, I can't think of anything more alienating, both for the person there on the receiving end, but particularly for the worker. How can you sit in a coop having to see so many patients in a day or whatever, or talk to them with your headphones on?
So
terrible.
Psychoanalysis helps us understand as well that policymakers, either consciously or less consciously, I think consciously as well, deliberately, so to speak, are using those, mechanisms of splitting desired from undesired consequences of their policies, of their own policies. So splitting operates all the way through. Projection, so projecting those undesirable consequences onto specific professional groups, and then blaming those professional groups for any failure. So CBT could be a very good example because, if you evaluate it in 3 years down the line, we can easily predict what might be the result of that evaluation, who will be responsible. Well, professionals, surely they will be scrutinized. Could they have done it better? It's not the model that's flawed in the first instance, it's just the professionals. So that splitting, projection and blame that psychoanalysis so well has articulated, Isabel Menzies, but also Anton Obholzer, he said something very powerful, that actually health professionals should have like the people who work with radiation, they have this kind of device that shows how much they have been exposed to radiation. That's really
like
something.
He used to use the metaphor
He used something like that, isn't
of
it?
the canary in the mine.
That's right. That's the one.
The canary actually dies of the toxic gas sooner than the.
That's precisely it.
And so we need something similar.
And mental health workers in particular, but not only social workers. I mean, people who are actually picking up and dealing with vulnerabilities that we all are subject to, and nobody knows in which point of life each of us may actually find oneself vulnerable. We just don't know.
Absolutely.
But in this neoliberal paradise, idealized model, we will always be, youthful, as healthy, and of course self-reliant. Right.
I had the most extraordinary experience last week. I was in bed waking up, and it was the week where Action for Happiness, all of these free happiness courses were announced by the Dalai Lama. And I was laying there and I was feeling this tsunami of rage coming up through me. I have to say that the most angry flack I get from readers of surviving work are Buddhists. I can guarantee it.
Really?
Because they don't get angry. No, they make me angry. So I'm there lying there, I'm furious at it. I'm going, this is a proselyte. I hate the Dalai Lama. Now I'm the person that's hated. And I'm angry. It's just, and I was grateful to psychoanalysis because for the first time in my life I actually understood what was going on here. But I think there is something very, very important, powerful about psychoanalysis, which sort of draws me, not to religious, but to actually revolutionary things, which is it helps us understand the blaming that's going on here, because that's the thing, and that feeds into the fear, which is, oh shit, I'm going to get it now because I've seen the truth. No one else is interested in the truth of what's going on here. If I open my mouth, I'm going to get it. I'm going to receive the blame for this. And I think that's a daily experience.
That's the lifestyle of whistleblowers, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Now I'm going to ask you one final question, which is, what can people do to, so I've written this down like a child, I don't know how I'm going to respond to this. What can people do to influence the systems that they work in?
Organise. I don't think anybody can do anything about the system individually. The price, the whistleblower, as you've said, whistleblowers. Whistleblowers have to act individually with great courage sometimes, but the price is horrendous. Both for management, but also the anxiety of, the spillage into his or her colleagues is pretty intense. You can only get change through collective action. This is what you said earlier. And the idea, my daughter's a junior doctor just down the road at the Royal Free. Now, as I understand the new contract, it's an attack on their working conditions. It places patients at risk. Maternity leave for these long trainings are damaged. Now, she can't do anything about that individually, any more than the social worker or there has to be some sense of professional and unionized collective action. And I think one of the Academy of Social Work from which I came betrayed social workers. It became so anxious about being acceptable, about getting its research points, that it didn't really become an assertive a professional instrument that looked after the lived conditions of social workers. And I think the same for, and the lower you go down the hierarchy of professions, and social care, everybody says how important it is, but if wages are anything to go by, they're not considered very important. Need to be organised. Unite is very important in that. Without that, you get the kind of cynical individualized politics, that hate any organization, that hate politics, that
what psychoanalysis really offers is that relationality. So just actually trying, speaking as a teacher, academic teacher here, I'm just saying, trying to make students relate, restoring that relationality, helping them internalize it, what actually, what we were talking about concerns them as well. And also the second pillar to that is answerability, as we call it. So actually seeing the consequence of your actions, your decision as a manager, actually, if you follow the money and follow the results of your actions, and maybe that is not affecting them as managers, but they surely know somebody in their family or in the circle who is unemployed, who has been suffering from mental care, and stuff like that. So I know it's a small thing, but that is a way of actually relating and building those connections on a micro level in order to have that possibility for, collective. So it's just supporting what you've said by actually how that can be done, at least within academia, hopefully. Academia, not only. And activism, I think as a public, I believe in activism, basically. 100%.
Yes.
On issues, 100%.
Yes, that's a good word. Very good word.
Well, activists, my final question to both of you is just what keeps you going in this work as an activist? Which I'm glad we both has.
I thought about that, Elizabeth, actually. And that'll be a philosophical answer, but a brief one. I think I have a very limited time on this planet, and the only thing, I can't deal with my mortality, psychoanalytically speaking, I'll die, but at least I can have a sense that I have tried to live that limited time in a meaningful way. And the only meaning for me is just to make this world a little bit a better place within my very limited capabilities. So that's really what really keeps me going, I have to say.
Jolly difficult question. Personal relationships keep me going. An absolute belief that I'm a citizen of any organisation that I'm a part of. And of course, psychotherapists, many clinicians think of themselves more like sole traders rather than citizens. I think I come back to your word activist. You have to find, and it doesn't really matter terribly, that activism implies that you have to bring people around you and engage with other people. Anything that sort of completely privatizes you.
But without relationships, we can't be activists. They sustain you. I fully agree with what you said. Oh God, love, loving relationships with many people and friends.
Yeah.
I mean, without that,
you're
one
doomed.
can't be an activist, I don't think.
No, without those, you're on your own. Okay?
You too, thank you.